In recent weeks, our world has changed. The COVID-19 virus has literally taken our world by storm, changing just about everything we know to be normal. This webinar will consider the role that grief plays, not only as we experience the global pandemic, but also in our healing. At first, it seemed very distant. The events in China, in Italy, and then in Spain. It seemed very, very sad, but very far away, until it wasn't. The United States now has many confirmed COVID-19 cases, and the death toll grows daily. We now know that we too will experience the pandemic that the world has been telling us about. David Kessler, who's an expert in grief, was interviewed recently by the Harvard Business Review, and he very wisely indicated that as a nation, we are grieving. We are grieving because the world has changed and our worlds have changed. And while we know that it's temporary, it doesn't feel like that. We have a tremendous loss in our daily routines and everything that seems normal. We're frightened about not only survival, but the economic toll that this will take. We've also lost our sense of normal connection with the people that we love, the communities that we exist in. And he also talked about something that we in the field know to be anticipatory grief, wondering and feeling concern about what the future will hold. The sense of loss of normalcy has been great. In the beginning, it seemed like, okay, the routine of school and work are disrupted, but there was, for a lot of people, a sense that we can do this. But as the days went on and the magnitude of this pandemic took hold, we started to realize that this was going to go on for a long time. We don't know how long, and for many it meant a sudden, abrupt loss of livelihood. We were told we had to stay home from our favorite places, our restaurants, coffee shops, places of worship, and even recreation. And we worried not only about these small businesses, but all the people that depended on those jobs for their livelihood. How will they survive? We were told that weddings, celebrations, sporting events would be closed, and that even funerals had to be postponed. Our normal routines were upended, and we don't know for how long. For healthcare workers, there's a duty and a desire to serve, but also a fear about the unknown and a fear about exposure, or of bringing home unwittingly the virus to the people that we love. For healthcare workers that are considered non-essential, there's a tremendous sense of guilt about staying home. We are grieving. And when we think about anticipatory grief, we wonder, when will this end? What will the future look like? Will I be able to stay safe? What about my loved ones? And the dreaded question, who might I lose to the COVID-19 pandemic? How many might I lose? We've also lost our sense of safety. Kessler applied the stages of grief to the COVID-19 pandemic. In the beginning, we were in denial. Maybe it won't come to the United States. Maybe it won't affect our state. But when that no longer could hold up, many people felt angry. Why is this happening to us? Why our world? Why now? Followed by a sense of bargaining. If I wash my hands enough, if I maintain my social distancing, maybe we will stay safe. Also a sense of tremendous sadness for how the world has changed. Ultimately, and in time, like any other loss, we may find a sense of meaning and we may grow to accept that this has indeed happened, but rarely do these stages happen in a linear order. What's more typical is that we move back and forth between them. One thing about the human experience is that we are not immune to grief. Grief comes to all of us. In the course of a lifetime, we lose people that we love, we lose things that we love, and it forces us to feel the vulnerability of our essential humanness, our need for comfort, our fears of aloneness. And it's also important to remember that grief will have many patterns. It will affect each of us a little differently. There's no one right way to grieve, but to push the pain of it away is rarely very helpful. Find that history can bring us solace. This isn't the first time that we have grieved as a nation or a world. The Great Depression, the World Wars, the assassination of some of our leaders, John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King Jr., Bobby Kennedy, the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster in 1986, where many watched in horror from their living rooms, watching the TV screen as the space shuttle exploded. The acts of terrorism, September 11th, Oklahoma City bombings, and certainly in recent years, the school shootings, have all challenged us to grieve collectively as a nation and to make sense of it. The reason that that's important is that collective healing comes as a result of collective mourning. And our current challenge is that we can't come together physically to mourn. We have to isolate instead, and that's incredibly hard. Grief is also complex. It's a response to death. It's a response to ambiguous sorrows. Grief comes with a loss of health or opportunity, and it may come to us in the form of personal tragedy or that of others. Grief involves many different domains, cognitively, behaviorally, and physically, in response to loss. Some of our symptoms of grief include psychological symptoms of sadness, guilt, anger, fear, loneliness. Physically, we may have a tightness in the chest or a hollowness in the stomach. We know that grief affects us socially. Many people who are grieving tell us that they have a really hard time feeling the same degree of connection with others when they are grieving, but at the same time long for it, long to be understood. Often people feel very, very preoccupied when they are grieving. And spiritually, there's a great impact as well. What does this mean? Has God completely abandoned us? Will my faith help me get through this or not? We also know that we've lost some of our traditions in grieving. As we institutionalize death, we stopped knowing really how to grieve with one another. We shortened the timeline for the expected course of grief. And as we've become more secular, we lost some of our traditions that may have come with our spiritual or religious practices as well. Some of the other things we may be experiencing during the pandemic, in addition to grief, are fear. Will we get ahead of this in time? Will we make it through? What will this look like on the other side? Anxiety or a sense of panic about it, and tremendous loneliness. So how can we get through this together? One is to remember that healing takes time. If we can try to stay in the present, that can be very, very helpful. With anxiety comes rumination about the past or fear about the future, and sometimes we worry about the worst case scenario. Both of those extremes take us out of the moment. I've spoken previously about trying to stay in the present with some sort of grounding or meditation or breathing practice. If that's an unfamiliar thing, you may want to add an app. There are many apps that are available to teach us mindfulness and breathing and meditation practices. Calm, Headspace, Insight Timer are just a few that are out there, and many of them are free. Another technique, which is a cognitive behavioral technique, is to try to let go of what we can't control and recognize what we can. There are lots and lots of things that we can't control, but there are a number of things we can, and it may be as simple as going to bed at the same time, waking up at the same time, paying attention to what you eat or how much you exercise. And it's so important to remember that we are not alone. We may feel alone, but we aren't. We are in this together. Also, trying to give yourself a huge amount of grace. We are all in this as the human experience as well, and so trying not to judge whatever you're experiencing or others. Again, we're doing the best that we can, and it's a roller coaster ride, so try to give yourself and those around you some degree of grace. Ultimately, if we let feelings happen and we acknowledge them, it can empower us. If we can maintain a routine, staying active, trying to pace yourself, get outside if you can, be in nature if you can, that can be helpful. And remembering to eat and sleep as you are able. One thing about this particular time of social isolation is at least we have the technology to help keep us connected. I'm hearing from lots of people that they're being much more intentional in their reaching out to one another, be it through FaceTime, Zoom meetings, Zoom happy hours, calling one another in a much more regular and intentional way than they might have been doing previously. So please do reach out. That's so, so important. And remember that we heal together. We heal in community. When we are able to come back together in person on the other side of all this, we will collectively mourn and we will collectively celebrate. We will also find in time that there is meaning. We will learn some things. And remember, we are resilient. One thing about being exposed to adversity is that we discover our strengths. And we may learn some new ways of coping, and we will grow stronger in time. But try to stay hopeful as you can. In closing, there are some resources on the Center for Loss and Life Transitions. The Dougie Center have a lot of online resources that can be very, very helpful. Stay safe, stay well. We will see one another on the other side.